Welcome. A little presentation on stories. Stories are problems to be solved. Stories ask questions. Sometimes that question is only what's going on. Um, Sometimes the question is what happens next. Anyway, quick look at some of those things. So stories are problems to be solved. Here's some examples uh, from Mr. O by Louis Trondheim. This is a super simple example. um, Little Mr. O here is always walking, always reaches this point where there is a chasm separating from where he wants to go, or where he is and where he wants to go. And in every episode, I think there's about 60, maybe 40 some, he tries to figure out how to get across. That's the problem to be solved. And here he finds a guy with a saw and a tree, another character doing that, follows that character, etc., etc. So the problem there is how to get across that chasm. Crazy Cat, very very famous strip, and very very famous for its main principal problem to be solved, which is Ignaz's problem, Ignaz's mouse. How can I throw this brick at Crazy Cat um, without the officer pup, the dog, seeing me? So many of the episodes are pretty much that problem to be solved, and Crazy Cat's a delight to watch it play out in so many many ways. And so we see Crazy Cat just sleeping on his brick. He's trying to look nondescript, and eventually, in fact, Crazy walks away, and actually that problem doesn't get solved until this sort of secondary panel all the way at the bottom, which is actually not even in the same timeline. Julie Doucet here is recounting a dream in which she's eating one piece um, of gum. She sees a cute guy in the high school hallway. Second piece of gum, she can't open her mouth. Third piece of gum. Wait, how many pieces has she had? Anyway, she's had a lot of gum. And the problem is like, how can I talk to this cute guy with all this gum coming out of my mouth? And it's just everywhere. It's on my teeth, etc. So if you've ever had a dream like that, you know that there's sometimes one central problem and you just can't get out of it. In the end, it works out for Julie, at least in dream world. This story from Laurent Lomed from Comics 2000. It's an old favorite of mine. The basic problem is, let's get these two fish um, from Paris to Figeac. So there they are in the Tupperware. They get into the car. The problem, get them from Paris to Figeac in this hot sun, in this hot car. And of course, if you've seen this story, you know it has digressions and diversions. The fish don't exactly make it, it adds complications. And that's one way that a story gets built, is from that simple premise: how do we can we get the fish from Paris to Figeac? And things get more and more complicated. Oh no, we messed up. And if you know that story, you know one survives, one doesn't. They try and revive them both, and stuff like that. And things just get kind of, there's a cascade of problems, and that can make for real fun reading. This is Liz Hickey. Great example. Why won't she's trying to draw her characters? Why won't you let me draw you right? That's the problem right there. Her characters won't let her draw them right, and this also has a sort of cascading series of events that happens as a result of trying to solve that problem. In this case, the characters come to life. They order her around. Um, they tell her to sit. They tell her to make a souffle. They start bossing her around. Um, they they decide they want to send her to Cancun, but she doesn't want to go to Cancun. She just wants to make a stupid comic without being distracted by Master Chef. Now get back to work. And now, so again, the problem has been restated at the end here. I just want to make a stupid comic without being distracted by Master Chef. Liz is so funny, and her comics are so radically not just surreal, but they're a little bit chaotic. And so the problem is stated once: why won't you let me draw them right? And then it's stated again I just want to make a comic without being distracted by MasterChef. It's a little bit different, but a little bit the same, and it's pretty funny. In examples like Liz Hickey's, "Why won't you let me draw you right?" is also a question, and sometimes stories merely ask questions. And here's a great classic from Jaime Hernandez. The story opens up with a question: What's wrong with Hopi? Right? That's not the main problem to be solved, is figuring out what's wrong with Hopi. That gets solved pretty quickly because this gets answered pretty quickly. Um, uh, she's suffering. There is a new white wall in town, and she needs to spray paint it. She needs to graffiti it. So the problem is how can I graffiti that new wall when I know that the cops are after me, and all sorts of other things. And so there's lots of questions in this one that are kind of silly and sometimes merely questions. How to get past this cop is a question. Um, what color spray paint to buy is another question or problem to solve. And then finally, what do I write in this sort of climactic moment, becomes another problem to solve. Another, what will Hopi write, is a question that is asked, and how will she react when she gets stopped by the cops too. So all these questions get answered. Have this question answered. Here's another story that starts off right with the question. This corpse, and I'm sure this is inspired by Corpse on the Imjin. This corpse is floating, uh, and says, "I wonder what I was before I got to be a bobbing, bloated, floating thing." And he just has this sort of meditation on what his life might have been, um, before he was a corpse. Um, or from Dave Lasky, young Neil Young, uh, "Is there any way I could visit the Inca?" The little kid is reading about the Inca civilization, and it's, of course, sorry, it's young Neil Young, and he goes back in time with his like magic glove, and that's basically it. It's just kind of a romp, but um, it opens with a question, which engages the reader. The reader wants to see how that gets solved. They want to see what happens as a result. Also by David Lasky, another comic that starts right up with a question: What do polar bears think about global warming? And then it goes off to detail some of the things that are happening to polar bears as a result of global warming, et cetera, et cetera. But starting with that question is really interesting. And also, if you just look at it really quickly and start here and only look at the ending, it's like this is our ending, is this cry. Or in some ways, this is the answer to the question. Panel one is the ending. The last panel here, this sort of really moving cry from this polar bear. Here's a silly one from Steve Weissman. There's a question or two in just about every panel. This is just sort of riffing and goofy. Where are the bank robbers? They took off in that copter. Why don't you fly after them? It's not his power. Well, what is your power? Doesn't somebody already have that power? So why are you called Eagle Man? Really? Where's your pet eagle? Etc. Etc. Just question after question after question. And again, that getting to hear the answer to that question keeps the reader engaged, keeps them reading. They want to know. And Ribs, or Steve Weissman, is just having fun, sort of like firing questions at the reader really, really fast. This one by Gilbert Hernandez is called Mosquito. A question in the mind already is, why is this called Mosquito? There are these corpses here and everything. And they look around, there's this huge wound here. Why is it called Mosquito? And then this character comes out of the forest here. Haha, I stole all their blood. And another question arises in our mind: is that the mosquito? And then they stab this kid, and this kid is still alive and yelling back at them. I've been killing before I learned to walk. You want to know how to kill me? Haha, you can't even kill me by burning. And you start to realize, okay, we're in some sort of surreal world, dream world, fairy tale world. And it ends. It's just a one pager. Oops. And so the mosquito is born to steal all the blood in the world. And so that first panel sort of answered, like, oh, we're seeing the story of the mosquito writ large, writ in folklore. Um, it's pretty cool. Here's a cool one by Carol Leigh. Carol is, well, I'm not sure who this character is, but she is shopping at a garage sale, and there've always been this mysterious old man's house. She's been curious about him for years. So that's another question, kind of. What's this guy been up to? Who is this guy? And now, why has he got this crazy stuff? He's got uncaged cobras and all this other stuff. And so she goes and she buys and she does some things, but then she gets charmed by the cobras into after he disappears into entering the house, and she becomes the new mysterious person in the house. But again, it starts off with that question, what's up with this guy? And it gets a little deeper and weirder. What's up with these uncaged cobras? Sometimes the question is just what's going on, sometimes a artist, an author, just wants to perplex you just a little, so you're not too put off, but you're engaged, but you just really want to know what's going on. And Jim Woodring, who does Frank stories, is doing this here. This little push-paw character is its name. This little mailbox-looking thing is super scared, and all of a sudden, and then this thing comes at him and sort of attacks him with these gentle, weird, like scepter gourd things. And now we see this character is kind of freaking out and mad. And then, oh no, he just takes off the mask, and it's just this our regular main character whose name is Frank. And he goes and he takes some effluent from under his tail butt area there, green stuff, and sticks it behind his ears. And then takes a cartoon date like chocolates and flowers to a new date house, and then is just sort of sucked inside the house, and then that's the end. So Woodring is trying to just sort of like keep you mildly perplexed, so that you're just, but also super interested in what is this goopy stuff. What what ritual did what game just happened? What's about to happen? Trots and Bonnie by Shari Flanagan. This is another, like, what's going on? Oh, Trots, a talking bird. He'd be the perfect pal for you. I'm going to go and see how much he costs. And then the bird really starts talking. He starts quoting Auden, and then the dog quotes Malcolm Forbes, and then the bird just starts quoting all sorts of things, some cliches, some famous lines, all sorts of things, and it just won't shut up. And so the question is like, what's going on? What's going on with this bird? And the dog knows that he's tired of it, and Bonnie comes back in. That bird cost $300. That's what's going on with it, and the dog ate it, and that's the end of that story. But that, like, what's going on keeps you reading. Like, why is this happening? And sometimes that what's going on is a formal game too. There's a man and a woman sitting on a bench. The uh, man, there's no words in this, right? So everything is icons and symbols, and this man has this like little heart in his thought bubble, and this woman has a little heart in her thought bubble. And then he says beer, but she crosses out beer. She says no beer. She says cigarette. He crosses out cigarette. And then he says love, and she says love, and then they walk away happily, or maybe not happily, because he's dreaming of beer and she's dreaming of a cigarette. But like that, what's going on? Like, why are they talking in this like strange language? What's going to be next if it's beer and then crossed out, and then sometimes the formal elements, and here's another great example, can be so compelling that you want to know what the artist is going to create for you next, what the author is going to like sort of send your way. And so here's an interesting one too that's kind of fun. It's just this man and the woman, and he's offering her a cigarette. They're clearly like well-to-do. They're clearly happy. They're clearly flying down the road really fast. The cigarette, he's got his, she's got hers. She's looking for her lighter. They pull out this like remote control or something. They aim it upwards, or is it a phone? What the heck's going on? So like, what's going on? And then this next moment, the sun comes closer to the earth. And what happens? They light their cigarettes right on the sun. And that's the end. What's going on is this incredible, like, interesting cartoon drawing game that you could only do in comics. It's terrific. And weirdly, this is by Emmanuel Gilbert, who's like well known for the photographer of Facet. Just amazing book, and it's not drawn it like this at all. And sometimes what will happen next is just the thing that keeps us reading. Here's a great story by Jaime Hernandez, and this character here is just recounting seeing this character she hasn't seen since junior high walk in. She talks a little bit about that character's past, but then in walks this really, really uh, brutish looking woman, and she looks like she's gonna pound her into oblivion, and she does, and then but the girl just sits there and takes it, and then and just it's just silent, and then she gets up and leaves, and like everybody's like, oh my god. And so it's just a bar, a story that happened in a bar or something, but what's going to happen next? And it starts here, then the story backtracks a little, and you read for two panels the junior high version of this story, and then you read the present story. Just what's going to happen next. And another Vaughn Baudet story, super silly. These two characters they have to duel, but the aggrieved party gets to select first the choice of weapons. You get either this very, very complicated semi-automatic rifle, or you get a brick. and and what's going on is, just we just watch as the story unfolds, and then the last panel is this very, luckily it's not pictured, but a grim sort of thing that happens. And then lastly, another crazy cat that is has a nice sort of what's going on thing to it. Ignatz is looking at this lonely mesa over here, this isolated rock, and starts to set up this bridge. What's going on? Why is Ignatz doing this? And then Ignatz has this bundle. It's a bindle, he calls it. Well, it's like what a hobo would have or whatever back in the early days. Carries it across the bridge onto the mesa, and look inside. It is a replica of himself. So what is? Oops, sorry. So what is he up to? Oh no! How do we go back? Hang on. There we go. How do we go back? How do we go back? What's going to happen next? How do we? What's going on? And this replica is of himself, and then we see, oh no, the dog has finally noticed that Ignatz is standing on that lone rock, and the dog goes across the way, and in the final panel we see that the mouse has lifted up the bridge. The dog is stranded on the mesa and is really furious. He kicks the replica mouse, and that's the end. And so we've just been wondering what's going to happen, and that's what happens. So that's an example, a bunch of examples of stories, the questions that they bring up, the problems that they're asking to be solved, that question of what happens next, the question of what's going on. It's really all about keeping the reader engaged. They want to keep reading. That's our job, is to like make it so the reader wants to go from one panel to the next and one page to the next, and hopefully follow us from story to story.